See, when a person comes to seek help, कोई आता है, कोई व्यक्ति सर्वाइवर जो मदद चाहिए के लिए आते हैं, तो क्या नज़रिया होता है? बेचारी कितनी दुखी है वो बेचारी और वो दुखी, उससे ही हम दूसरे को डिमीन करते हैं। Rather than giving that credit to this person that whatever she has suffered, fine, she has, we know, but then she had the guts to get out of the house. Then who should decide for her? It's her decision, not yours. Who should decide what she should do? And let us also accept one fact, that when a person comes in such dire circumstances, they're totally shattered. And they might say, and they usually in our country, in our culture, आप बताओ मैं क्या करूं? You tell me what shall I do? You guide me what shall I do? What should the counselor do right here? This is the time from where the counselor has to help this survivor to establish her agency, to make her choice. It begins from very first contact. And if you make this survivor to take her decisions on her own, is what is going to help her build her life. But yes, it doesn't come like this, because it's totally shattered, broken person. मुझे नहीं समझ आती है क्या हो रहा है, मैं क्या करूं, मुझे नहीं पता चल रहा है. That's where a lot of patience is required on the part of the counselor to groom this person to come to a composer state. Be composed. And then gradually see, वो जो जाले होते हैं ना, वो थोड़े निकालने पड़ते हैं. तो counselor helps this survivor to remove those cobwebs. The counselor doesn't remove the cobweb. Helps the survivor to remove those cobwebs. वो जाले जब हट जाते हैं ना, तब अरे अच्छा यहाँ तो लाइट है, अंधेरा नहीं है सब. Because of those cobwebs, everything was dark, but now there is light there, and she is able to see that light, and that gives her a glimpse of light in her life, and that's where she moves on to take her decision. Gradually, holding the hand, the counselor leads her to take her own decision. This is where she establishes her agency. And this is what should happen in the shelter space, inside the space also, outside the counseling sessions, but inside the shelter. It's their agency, it's their choice, that they should be encouraged to see and see whether it is right or wrong. All our choices are not always right. So then we should be able to see what is right, what is wrong, what is going to be helpful, what is going to be damaging to her. This is that space. And that is where I think the shelter's role comes in. That very firmly, very first principle, that the residents should be able to establish their agency and establish their choice. And so the routine of shelter and various activities that take place should be in such a manner that facilitates them to make their choices. आज मैंने चॉइस की कि मुझे कोई फ़लानी चीज़ सीखनी है. मैंने सीखना शुरू किया, मगर मुझे लगता था ये तो मुझे बहुत इंटरेस्ट है, मगर अब मुझे में इतना इंटरेस्ट नहीं, तो मैं बदलना चाहती हूँ. फाइन, देयर इज़ नथिंग सैक्रोसैंक्ट. चेंज, experiment on something else and see what you like. Maybe even second thing you may not be liking it. Let it be third. Yes, give that freedom of choice. And that's where they then understand how to make choices also. So it is very important. And I tell you, shelter home is, as I told you earlier, is a zebra crossing. Zebra crossing का अंत तो आएगा ना. Then you will have to decide you want to go left, right, center. And ये जो time है, this is very important. That I take my decision. What do I do? And how do I go about doing it? And this is the process of rehabilitation and reintegration. This rehabilitation and reintegration of every resident should begin from day one, where she is able to learn to make choices, establish her own identity and agency, begins from there, and then final decision. So this rehabilitation, reintegration doesn't take place after 5-6 months. That's a failure. It has to begin from day one. And this process of rehab and reintegration, if it is involved into day-to-day life, they will never realize that, I have reached the end of the rope and now I am going. My time is over. I've got, and I can go out now. I don't want to be in the shelter anymore. And we have examples. We have innumerable examples of this kind. And I can quote also such example. A person, very young person, both kinds of violence. Marital, yes. Marital rape, yes, very young person. And besides marital rape, violence at home in the marital family, faced total dejection from the natal family, which may not want to call violence, but it is. Non-support, total non-support, and dejection from the natal family is also violence. Such a young person, very bright young person with us. And gradually she could take her life, charge of her life, and she was facilitated also to study, because study is something which she was doing it before she came here. So she continued her studies, continued her higher studies also, continued to go out for a couple of days where she was volunteering, only a couple of days, a fixed time. And at the end, she also got selected for a job. So she was facilitated to prepare a resume, prepare for the interviews, choose whether this is the right kind of work she would like to, and gradually that person got selected for that interview and is in the job now, in the same sector. This is rehabilitation that begins from day one and continues. reintegration begins from day one and ends there. So it's not final thing. It's a process, and it needs to be realized that rehab and reintegration is a process and not a final end product. That you do see the end product, but that process begins much before. Like you see a child when the child is born, but before that the child is there for 9 months in the womb of the mother. So that's the whole process that this particular child has gone through. Similarly, rehab reintegration is a process. And I think shelter homes should see this as a process from day one, so that they can really provide empowering ecology in the shelter, wherein you do not pump in empowerment, which can never be pumped in, but create that ecology in the shelter, which itself is very empowering. Dissent, yes, hot arguments between the team members and the residents, why not? Dissent, fine. Then thresh out also. So resolve the dissents also, resolve the differences also. So encourage whatever differences are there, at the same time also resolve them. So let them learn to do that as well. I think this is the kind of atmosphere, this is the kind of approach, this is the kind of outlook that the shelter should have for a person who is at the zebra crossing and is now finally set to find one's own home. We have definitely talked quite a bit. We made a reference also to some minuscule number of shelters where which are black spots, let me say, in this particular field. And these black spots, besides that, even in those so-called other shelter homes, many times we come across the kind of conditions of the residents which is very exploitative. Like, I am the superintendent, so सुपरिटेंडेंट मैडम के घर में तो आके काम कर जाना है, वो काम कर जाना है, या वो जो कहे वो करना ही है. You know, things like that. This is very exploitative, and this happens. And I think this is very important, where the shelter home should have protocols, wherein it is very clearly mentioned that no resident could work for any person of the organization, free or paid. Should not work for anybody's family. These kinds of certain and many more things I think, and there is no dearth of how exploitation takes place, and I think this is something which needs to be really guarded against also. Secondly, I think exploitation takes place within the shelter also, and that is where there needs to be many protocols which are very, very clearly laid down, and against which one can check what is happening or what is not happening. So many exploitative conditions, difficult situations for the residents can be avoided. Very important thing I would like also to bring in here is that if we can create, it takes time, I know, I understand, for anyone to create one's own monitoring and evaluation system. So if we have monitoring and evaluation system gradually built on the basis of our own setup, get it vetted through somebody who is expert on monitoring and evaluation, and if we keep this kind of system in place, it really helps us to check this kind of exploitation or certain activities which are not in favor of the residents. Also, I know it's not, it can be done very often, but one may be able to do it once in 5 years' time also. Evaluation of shelter home. Evaluation, monitoring and evaluation is internal. You can get evaluation done by an external body, an external person. And not that that person is related to the organization, but an independent external person. And this can also help the organization and the shelter home to see where are they going, where have they missed the road, where they are on the road, and where they can go further on. So you have a good roadmap as well. So these are two mechanisms I would suggest one can adopt. At least begin with monitoring and evaluation, because external evaluation is expensive affair and that can be gradually thought over. Then I would think all shelter homes are licensed by the government. No shelter home can exist without unlicensed, right? So that means there is inspection also. This inspection system, if I was to prepare that, I will not do the kind of inspections that happen. These inspections are verifications of hard structural concrete facts. Do that is important. That is no less important. But I would suggest, if I would be the person in the inspection team, I would do it differently. I would do it differently, not to check any organization, but to do justice to the inspection. One thing, I will not ask personal, private questions to the survivors, nothing of the sort. I will not get into their lives, but I would talk to the group of shelter residents on a particular parameter, and I will interact with them at one-to-one level, not at this level, but at the equal level, sit together in absence of the caregivers and just talk to them. And there are a lot of things that one can understand. Of course, you have to have your own parameters drawn, what you are going to get out of that discussion. And this is where you can understand how things are going. So this inspection team, which is state controlled, needs to be more imaginative. That's what I would say. Do whatever factual things you have to do. 10 कुर्सियाँ हैं, खिड़कियाँ हैं नहीं है, कूलर है नहीं है, फलाना है. Do all those things. This is also important. ये भी important है कि गद्दे है तो फटे है कि टूटे है. That is also important. All those things are no less important. It needs to be done. But it also needs to be, one needs to spend time with the residents and understand how they are feeling and where they are. And this is to be done very sensitively, not by an officer, so-called officer. Officers can go and do that inspection, but this has to be done by a sensitive social worker, so that You can understand the nerves. You know that in Ayurveda, when you go to your Ayurvedic doctor, आपकी नाभि देखते हैं, nerves. This is what you should be able to do, and that you can be doing only if you are able to interact with the group, not as a higher up, but as a friend. I think these are the few things I would like to suggest for a better quality of shelter.